Ewan,
Hey?
what video game restored your faith in gaming?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I think a lot of us can relate to the idea of our hobbies ebbing and flowing. We all get those kind of like, I guess you could call them fallow periods where stuff just that is new isn't really catching your eye. And I think, you know, with games, especially for me, when the more we got into that kind of like homogenous, and I don't want to tarnish the entire medium with the same brush because that isn't fair, but it was a certain point kind of like from 2017 onwards where a lot of the games we were getting are the same kind of thing. And more recently, you know, in the wake of stuff like Fortnite and Apex Legends, every single thing is kind of becoming a homogenous battle royale-esque title, and that kind of really, you know, that's frustrating. And especially, you know, I'm a big Batman Arkham guy. There's a Batman Arkham game coming out next year that I have no interest in playing because it looks nothing like that series. So in general, I've kind of been a little bit like, about gaming. But at the same time, last year I played a game that I was like, wow, what have I been doing? I think it made me realize that my window, my view of gaming as a medium has been kind of narrowed in recent years. And playing Hades was like, oh my god, you know, and it should be, I should be able to say this is a game that opened up loads of doors for me in terms of checking out other indie stuff, but I'm really bad and I haven't checked out other stuff aside from Hades. But that being said, you know, embracing a new genre like a roguelite, which to be fair, when I first heard about it, I was like, that's gonna scare the crap out of me. I'm not gonna have a good time with that. But I played both Hades and Elden Ring the same year, and it was like, you know, Hades more so, it was just such an amazing example of like creative ingenuity. We're gonna do something amazing with the, you know, Greek mythology that doesn't feel overly edgy or kind of like caustic. It was very much expressive, vibrant, funny, challenging, and kind of refined. And just how tightly oiled that game is and how much it made me rethink my attitude to games, along with stuff like Elden Ring, where I kind of felt like, oh, I've been conditioned by so many years of single-player games where if I fail, that means I'm bad, forgetting that gaming, to begin with, it's like, well, no, failing is part and parcel, and you learn from your mistakes, and you get better, you level up, you get stronger, and that formula was just so immaculately well done. It just made me, it recalibrated my brain a little bit, and I just want to thank Supergiant because not only did I get to indulge in lots of stabby, I also got to be very lusty over a bunch of very hot Greek mythological characters, which is always a fun time. Damn. So yeah, Hades is great, and I love that game very dearly.
Joe,
yes.
Which game restored your faith in gaming?
Well, to reiterate a point that Ewan made before about homogenous gaming, I'm thinking of a different era here. You know, you were talking about 2017 and the
again.
look, Commander Keen is a unique experience, right?
Yeah.
He's an individual.
He is. Anyway, so to go back on that point there, that was the sort of 2017 era you're talking about, homogenous battle royales, and you know, it was the age of the open world. But I'm going further back. I'm going to the sort of mid to late 2000s, where games had really fallen into this kind of sweaty, unpleasant pit of just brown and grey shooters, right, that were just utterly miserable experiences. You know, I think personified really well by Army of Two. You know, let's be PMCs are cool and we've got cool masks. Like, shut up.
They were cool.
And Kane, you know, Kane and Lynch, some of the most hateful games you can imagine. But there was this real push for like everything was edgy. Everything was grey, like, oh, the graphics are getting realistic, let's make them grey.
I remember these days well.
Awful. The brown age.
The browning.
I love
the browning, yeah, as I've heard. Bad. Really didn't like it. I remember just being like, can that just be a game that just isn't a miserable brown shooter, you know? And then in 2010, I believe, Red Dead Redemption came out. Now, I'll tell you something, right? We are... now, Red Dead, admittedly, the colour palette is mostly brown. Mostly brown, and it's a game where the primary mechanic is shooting people. But it was a game that was made with soul. Absolute soul. I mean, I like westerns anyway. And, you know, I'd loved Gun when I was younger. That was a great game, you know. I like Red Dead Revolver. I thought it was something, but Red Dead Redemption was just something else. It was felt like a real paradigm shift. And another thing about it was that I remember when I played Mass Effect before Red Dead. You know, in Mass Effect, you're Paragon or Renegade, right? You don't do the one which appeals to you at the moment. You choose whether you're going to be a good guy or a bad guy at the start, don't you? So I was like, I'm going to be a renegade because I was an edgy boy. And Renegades, it's kind of boring. But when Red Dead was coming out, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be the most like amoral psycho outlaw possible. Yeah, man. And then Red Dead's world felt so absorbing and so real at the time that I didn't want to do that. I felt like all those NPCs, I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want to like let them down. I ended up being this honorable dude who wanted to do right. And it shifted my entire kind of approach to gaming, because that's where gaming was going, in a sense where like things felt so absorbingly real that when I did go back to Mass Effect and replayed it, I was like, I want to do this Paragon style, and it's so much more interesting being a diplomat. So Red Dead, it pushed me to this kind of, even though the game is bleak and depressing in a lot of ways, and it's got all these themes of entropy and the death of the West and the closing of the frontier essentially, its outlook was one that pushed me towards kind of positivity and towards this light again. And I feel like a lot of gaming has been on the up from there. We got out of that era of just let's make everything gory and violent and sweary and nihilistic. There's a place for that, but Red Dead shone a light.
You embraced the light.
I embraced that light. I embraced the light that came from those absolutely gorgeous sunrises that Red Dead showed me. I remember seeing the first time I saw a skybox in that being like, beautiful. Silhouettes of horses on a hilltop in the sunrise. Like, faith restored.
Scott.
Hello.
Which video game restored your faith in video games?
This kind of happened twice over the years. I remember doing an interview with someone and they asked if I ever took a break from video games, and I realized in that moment that I hadn't. My entire life, I've just played all the video games for the last 30 plus years of my life, for as long as possible. But there were two times when I sort of was like, oh, am I loving this as much as I was or whatever. And the first time was Metal Gear Solid 5. That was the thing that sort of, when I finally started playing it, I just remembered how much I loved big, dumb, goofy, stupid Kojima bullshit. And I'd let that slide. I went through university. I did all, you get so wrapped up in wider or more deeper philosophical thinking, and you want everything to mean something, and it should. But at the same time, you have to account for those games that can just be big, dumb fun. And Metal Gear Solid 5 is by far not the most big, dumb fun of that series, but it was just a reminder of like, nah, you can love this fiction and it's great. And the other one, like we've mentioned before, depending on which order this gets edited in, was how dark a time 2017 was, and how incredibly itemized and boring something like the open world genre had become, and how predatory and monetization driven everything was. 2017 is always the year that I mentioned that had three of the worst examples of that in For Honor, Battlefront 2, and Shadow of War. Orc loot crates, not what anybody wanted. And so it was in that year when the Switch finally dropped, and we did get Mario Odyssey later in the year, but it was Nintendo's sort of wave, just sort of reminding everybody that you can just make a video game. It doesn't have to be this thing that takes up weeks of your life, and you have to have daily quests and microtransactions and storefronts and whatever. It can just be a video game. It's fine. It can be designed to be finished. And I thought that was encapsulated in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's cheesy that it was a breath of fresh air, but it literally was. It just literally was. It was such a reminder of just maximizing a 3D space, kind of like what Tomb Raider did back in the 90s, before the influx of Naughty Dog and cinematics and things like that. Just a playable space with a ton of different physics options that you can do there. Just go play a video game and enjoy it. That's all it needs to be. Doesn't need to be another job that you're taking on. So Legend of Zelda and Metal Gear, propping my life up to this day.
Si, which video game restored your faith in video games?
So Scott's shout of Breath of the Wild, very solid, absolutely, because I have sort of a weird thing with open world games where I get overwhelmed by too much choice, and I turn off from most open world games quite early on because it's like there's so much to do and I just don't know what to pick, and I don't know what you want me to pick, so whatever, I'll go find something else to do. And I've struggled with a lot of open world games like that, and Breath of the Wild obviously very different, so I appreciate it for that. But also the other game that came out basically at the same time and got completely overshadowed is Horizon Zero Dawn. And an element of that is because it has such a specific linear story. Like, the main story of it is so much the driving force. And more than any other open world games where you kind of create a character at the beginning and you're just like plonked in potentially an interesting world, but you're just kind of running through whatever's going on. You are absolutely instrumental to this world. Like, Aloy is a huge important factor in the story. Like, she's the absolute central point of Horizon. So that really pushed me to like unwrap that mystery, and I love that story unfolds that way. Like, you learn more about why the world is what it is. And more than that, I mean, it just looks gorgeous, isn't it? It's like the best open world, view-wise, to this day, I think. maybe with the exception of the sequel. It's just incredible to look at. And like I just said before we recorded this, I probably took that exact same shot. Like that might be mine for all I know. Like I spent so much time just taking photos of that gorgeous open world. And also the combat, just everything about it. It was just like the combat was so good. It's not just like flinging arrows. Well, there is a lot of flinging arrows, but like you have to target specific parts, and you can approach combat in so many interesting ways and use all these different tools instead of just like, oh, make the numbers go up higher. Like
Robot dinosaurs.
dinosaurs! Like I remember that game being revealed, and I was like, I didn't have a PlayStation 4 at the time, so I was like, I can't play this, so I just can't think about it. And when I finally got around to it, it was so worth it. Incredible game. Yeah, absolutely. Also, special shout out, Persona 5, because sort of before even working here, it's like time investment is a whole thing with video games, and I really like JRPGs, but they can be a massive time investment that might not pay off. And I hadn't played a good JRPG for a long time, and Persona 5 was one where I was like, oh yeah, I actually really like this genre. And that game's like 120 hours long. So yeah, that was like, oh, I like JRPGs, I guess I'll go play Yakuza next. So that's an honourable
You should
mention.
play Yakuza.
Yakuza 7
Yakuza
is fantastic.
Howdy, Adam.
Hello.
What video game restored your faith in gaming?
Well, my answer is a little game from 2007, and that game is Portal.
Oh!
Yes, now let me explain. So this was the time when obviously, all of the Call of Duties were really kind of at the height of like popularity, and like they were just dominating in terms of first-person shooters. And then when this little game came along, I was like, ooh, I went in completely blind. I knew nothing about this game at all. And I saw the gun, and I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, let's have a little go. Fully expecting just a game that was all puzzle-based, and then suddenly, when GLaDOS's voice appeared and you kind of figured out, oh, I don't have to die at this one, I actually save myself. And then you start getting all the information about the Rat Man and everything else going on. When you could go behind the scenes and see what was going on, man, I ate that up. Yeah. And that really showed me that games can not just be about, mechanics, but that story behind everything. And I was just invested. I bought the art book and I just read everything about it. And obviously the second one came along later on, but it was that peak of when, it just showed what more games could be rather than just shooty, bang, bang. And I was like, don't get me wrong, like, Modern Warfare, it has its place, absolutely, but that game was magic.
Did you buy a replica for them?
Of course I did.
The mark of true excellence.
Of course I did, and I listened to the soundtrack as well until I passed out. Like, honestly, it is the best, and it didn't outstay its welcome. That's what I really like. It kind of jumped in, did what it wanted to do, told its story, and then left. And that, for me, is just the mark of a classic.